Good morning. Today we look at Romans chapter 13. And Paul begins this with, saying, let every person be subject to the government, to the governing authorities. He says, for there is no authority except from God. And, it's this part especially, it was one of the places in the Bible that causes me to say that, one of the traits of a good Christian is that you're also a good subject of your country. You're a good citizen. And that's, when Jesus was asked about is it legal to pay taxes to Caesar? It's, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's. And to realize and remember that, God gave us laws, the 10 Commandments and quite a few others, so that we would have an ordered way of living. And that's what the government does for us. It provides an ordered way of living. We may not always agree with speed limits or taxes and those different things, but the laws are in place for our protection. And so we are to be good citizens. And he says in verse 2, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed. For those who resist will incur judgment. And he says, do you wish to have no fear of the authorities? Then do what is good. Follow the laws. It is God's servant. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid of the authority. And that's, if you're out on the highway and you're, speeding well over the speed limit and a police officer is there, they have the right, the duty to stop you. And you have no cause to say, well, what are they picking on me for? Because you were clearly breaking the law. So if you're following the law, you're driving the speed limit or whatever laws it may be, you don't need to worry. You see this cop, you don't have to slow down. You don't have to sweat for a little bit. Is he going to come after me? So when we follow the laws, we don't need to worry about the authorities or to fear the authorities. And I know that, many places, they'll have the, law enforcement officers come to schools, especially to the grade schools, and try to get a relationship, so that the kids aren't afraid of the authorities. And because there's so much negative, said that way. And if when, the law officer says, stop, the criminal stopped, we would have much less hatred and action going on. It's just, I saw that, again, there was, somebody with a knife and they said, hey, drop the knife, settle it. But, the person refused to do that. And, for whatever reason. So, if we could respect authority, earthly authority, heavenly authority. This is what Paul is talking about here in this first part of Romans. He says in verse 5, one must be subject not only because of the wrath, the punishment that comes from the authorities, but because of our consciences. He says, for the same reason you pay taxes, the authorities are God's servants, so pay them what is owed to them, and respect them. And I understand, and I complain about the taxes I have to pay and think they're too high, but yet I know that the services that our government provides for us are many. And part of those services are, the police officers that keep our roads cleared and, the people that are maintaining the roads. There's a lot that goes on that way. And so to be a good citizen and, but again, then to make sure that the authority of the county, the state, the country, to make sure that it's not being oppressive and excessive either that way. Then he kind of switches thoughts maybe a little bit in verse 8. He says, owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves has fulfilled the law. And, what he says, in verse 9, the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in the word, love your neighbor as yourself. And we know that that's, part of the great commandment. Love the Lord your God with heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And we admit that that's not always easy to do. Sometimes it's not easy to love ourselves either, because we know we have faults. We know that, we're not perfect. And people might say and do things that hurt us, but yet, to seek retribution or to try to get even isn't what God would have us do either. And it is not to be a punching bag for others, or not to be a scapegoat or whatever it is. But, if each of us respected the others, the same, there wouldn't be so much division and so much problem in the world today to take all of that to heart. And that kind of goes back to what I mentioned about, the person with a knife, just that I read about, I think it was just yesterday it happened. And, this person was not respecting the business, not respecting the police officers, not respecting himself, or, whatever, all of those things. And thinking too much maybe of self, and maybe not being in the right mind. I don't know all the details, but, another good thought is always to do no harm, and if we can figure out a way in situations to, do no harm, to love our neighbors as ourselves, and, all the commandments that Jesus talked about here are, the commandments that deal with interpersonal relationships. And the first 3 of the 10 commandments deal with our relationship with God, and the others deal with our relationships with other human beings. And, he doesn't mention in that one, in this, he doesn't have the, honor your mother and your father in this, but it's, these are, he talks about the commandments that are protecting others, from who we are, You shall not commit adultery. I mean, that it protects the other. It also protects us. You shall not murder. Protects the other, but also, protects us. It keeps us within the law, because, it's illegal to kill others. You shall not steal. Again, it protects others, but it protects ourselves. It honors others' right to own things. And, and there's so much thought in our world today, with the people shoplifting from the stores. Oh, there's a big conglomerate. They don't notice. Well, any and everything that is stolen makes the prices that we pay for stuff cost more. And we know that. But yet, in so many places, they don't dare apprehend the shoplifter or confront the shoplifter because of the imminent threat of danger. And so much of it is just a blind eye to turn to this stealing and to, not to murder, but there's so much kind of just let go, and it shouldn't be that things would be let go that way. But if we could come back to the point of honoring our neighbors and honoring what belongs to someone else, and not thinking the world owes me everything. And that's part of what so many people think, that, the world owes me, and, they've got so much they won't notice a little bit. And that's just not true for sure. And then the last part he talks in here about is being prepared for our death, being prepared for the coming of Jesus. Night is far gone, the day is near. Let us lay aside the works of darkness, put on the armor of light. And again, these things that we are to put off, to lay aside are the sins. They're the, reveling, drunkenness, debauchery, licentiousness, quarreling, and jealousy. Put all of those away. And again, goes back to loving your neighbor as yourself. And again, too, loving yourself. I mean, this is such an important thing, that we are comfortable with who we are, and when we are comfortable with who we are, comfortable enough, maybe none of us is 100% satisfied, but to know that I'm the best person that I can be, at least most of the time, and then it, the very last thing he says, put on Christ and make no provisions to satisfy the desires of the flesh. Not easy to do because, I mean, of the selfishness of who we are. And it's really hard to sometimes put others first, but this is what Jesus would, love our neighbors as ourselves. So it's not putting them above us, but putting them on an equal footing. And if each person could put each other person on an equal footing and have that respect and integrity, the world would be such a much better place.